Good evening, everybody. Monday morning quarterback, episode 32. Hope you all are having a great start to your week. And tonight we're going to discuss shock maintenance, really suspension maintenance. We'll go into some torsion bar stuff you should be looking at as well. And just some things you should look for each week to make sure your shocks are operating at their peak performance. And also some things to look at as far as torsion bars are concerned. Last week, Thursday, we had the final night of SmackDown. We were there for that. Sunshine ran second for CSI. And then the next night at Gas City, Kevin Thomas Jr. picked up the win and in USAC competition and retook the point lead. Him and Sunshine are having a heck of a battle, and Wyndham's in there as well. And then Jake went to Lawrenceburg for us on Saturday. I took Hudson BMX Racing. And season's kind of winding down here in the Midwest, so this weekend I'm taking the weekend off from going to races. I'm going for a big bike ride down in southern Indiana that I do every year called the Hilly 100. And then next week I'll be at Sweet Springs for 3 nights. So we're going to finish the season strong. We got a lot of stuff coming up, and looking forward to getting out to some more races, meeting you guys. We certainly appreciate all the feedback as it pertains to Monday morning quarterback, and feedback's been good, and that's why we continue to do them for you guys. So as I said, hope you all are having a great start to your week. We'll dive into some suspension maintenance, and then looking forward to next week, I'll have some camera help again, and I always got to beg one of the guys at the shop to come back and operate the camera for me on late on Monday nights. So next week I'll have camera help again, and there's been a lot of talk on social media as it pertains to torsion bars. Do they go bad? Do they not go bad? Can you flip them different directions? And so we will dive into that next week. We're actually going to go live on our torsion bar dyno, show you exactly what happens when you flip a torsion bar around, and how it changes the rate and how the shock moves around, and then and we're just going to show you that. So again, as any of these things go, and I did a little disclaimer when I was commenting on a torsion bar story last week on social media, is I'm just trying to give you guys the best of my knowledge that I've gained the past 20 years in this sport, and it's just my opinion. I feel my opinions are pretty good, as I've been in this industry for a couple decades now and seen a lot of different things from the manufacturing side of a lot of different products. As many of you know, I started my career at MPD Racing when I was in high school and worked there through college and stuff, through trade school, and spent almost 10 years there. And we were a manufacturer of sprint car components, so got to see everything there, from manufacturing sprint car components. We sold tens of thousands of torsion bars a year. Schroeder Enterprises, Gary and Karen, they private labeled a torsion bar for us, but we did extensive testing. So anything I'm telling you guys, it's just based on my experience. I'm trying to share that knowledge with you, with all of our customers at CSI, and then anybody that wants to tune in. So if I say something that you don't believe, that's okay. Differences of opinions are all right, and there's more than one way to skin a cat, as they say. So next week, look forward to some torsion bar facts and live torsion bar dynoing at CSI. But tonight we're going to do suspension maintenance, what I look for each week as I would go through my sprint car, midget, quarter midget, things I would look at, and just to make sure everything's working the way it should. Because 20 races or so between shock rebuilds, you should still be giving everything a good once-over every week. So a couple things. If you're dirt racing, as Hudson's car is filthy behind me, and you pressure wash the car at the car wash or at home, always be sure to, with compressed air, blow off the shocks really good. We want to make sure we get the monoballs really clean and we're not getting rust in there or gunk and grime. These should always be relatively free. Same with your radius rod Hymens. And don't use harsh chemicals when cleaning your shocks. So we love Mean Green because they sponsor local racing, but like Mean Green and some of those other really harsh chemicals, Brake Clean, it's really hard on the seals, and the wiper on our shock and most any shock's exposed. So we recommend a stiff bristle brush and simple green to scrub that shock and get it clean, and then and that's a good way to get your shock clean and be able to inspect for damages, if it's got any leaks or anything like that. But stay away from brake clean and harsh chemicals. So Karen, no problem. We're glad Sam could have the week off, and we've got your family in our prayers this week. We hope everything goes well with the surgery. So I have a twin tube shock here, RS15 LT, and once it was washed and cleaned, and I would take it off the car. So a couple things. All 4 shocks should come off the car every week, and it's simply to give it a good inspection, okay? So the easiest thing to do, this is a twin tube shock, is you want to fully extend your shock, pull it all the way out, and then slowly compress it. That first little bit of compression is where you'll see all the problems. 90% of the problems you will see. Major problems with the shock. Full extension and that first little bit of compression. If you see a dead spot, if you feel a dead spot there with a twin tube shock, more than likely you got a busted gas bag, or the shock has pushed some oil out, okay? So that is what you should be looking every week. If it's a gas shock and you have a little bit of dead spot, make sure there's gas in it, okay? We get that call often, my shock's got a dead spot, and it's just because the gas had leaked out or they hadn't checked the gas in a very frequent time, and so you're feeling a dead spot because there's no gas. So make sure there's gas in it if it's a monotube shock. Twin tube, any dead spot there, we got an issue, okay? Another thing I like to do while I have the shock off the car is a full compression, and as I'm compressing, I'll rotate it 360. And what I'm doing is I'm feeling for any bit of bend in the shaft as I extend it back out 360. If at some point it grabs, I'll give it a really good look, because if the shaft's bent slightly, it could still go in and out on the car, but what it's going to do, it's going to end up driving the bushing out of the shock, and then it's going to fail and leak on you throughout the race. So this is a good, easy way. Sometimes the shafts are bent so slightly you can't tell, but if you can rotate it 360 as you extend it and compress it, probably no bent shaft. And those are the 3 main things I look for. No dead spot at full extension, my monoballs are free, shaft isn't bent. At that point I would clean it up, put it back on the car, all right? If it's a adjustable shock, I got a RS17 here. If it's an adjustable shock, I'll also make sure the adjuster screws in and out freely. The last 3 years or so, we've actually put a seal in there. We used to have more of a problem with dirt and grime getting down in there and gumming up the driver, so we actually sealed that. And any shock that comes in for repair, we seal that, okay? So, but good to just make sure everything's free there. If it's not, that's an easy fix. We'll break the jam nut free and screw the rod end off, clean all that out, brake clean in here is okay, a little bit of grease, and when you go to put it back on, make sure this is at full soft and screwed on. That's for a CSI shock. If you're doing a Penske or something else, the process is a little different. We can help walk you through that. And we'll do a video sometime on how to rebuild the rod ends. Something we used to have to do very frequently, but since we started sealing it, that isn't something we have to do very frequently. So on a gas shock or an adjustable, I would make sure that's free. And then on a monotube shock as well, I would, at this point, check my gas pressure, make sure nothing silly happened. When shocks lose gas, and this does happen, the number one thing is it's leaking at the inflation tool. 9 times out of 10, that's where it's leaking. And that copper crush washer on the inflation tool has gotten worn out, and you need to replace the end. So 9 times out of 10, that's where it's leaking. The other place it could be leaking is if that valve core, the insert there, just got loose. So you just use a valve core tool like you would use on your tire, tighten it up, okay? Very rarely we'll see that Schrader valve actually fail. There's a spring in there, we'll see that fail. If it's an internal problem with the shock, you'll know right away, because as you charge this with nitrogen and then you were to depress that Schrader valve and it shot oil out, dead indicator, we got a major problem. There should not be oil in this chamber. That divider piston should keep the oil and the nitrogen separate. And so if there's oil in there, that means the seal has failed on the divider piston's broke, something like that. Shock needs repaired, okay? So I would just give this a good once over, make sure a rock hasn't hit this and cracked it or bent it or anything like that. And those are a couple things you could do 5 minutes a week just to make sure that everything is good with your shocks, all right? And cleaning them, like anything on your race car, the cleaner it is, the easier it is to spot an issue, all right? So those are things you should look at every single week. Now, there are things that can fail that will pass all these tests that I just told you, okay? If you raced on a really rough track, there's a chance you maybe bent a shim or something and you're not gonna feel it there. That's one of the reasons we dyno our customer shocks for free, okay? If you own a set of CSI shocks, we will never charge you to dyno it, because we want to make sure they're operating at the peak performance, all right? So I'm not going to charge a customer to dyno their shock, ever. We never have, okay? So if you ever were in a question, if you're a local guy, easy. Run it in. Sometimes we can dyno it while you wait. If you called ahead, we can certainly make a time where we can dyno it while you wait. If you're from out of town and you're close shipping-wise, definitely worth the, 25, 30 bucks both ways of shipping to make sure that everything's good. Or if one of our local dealers or rebuilders have the dyno, they can check it for you. So if you race on an extremely rough track, good idea to dyno your shocks. If you were to flip and land back on your wheels, okay, and nothing's bent on the shock, visually everything looks good, you really should dyno them, because good chance something internally got damaged, even though there's no bent shaft or no dead spot. But you will catch 9 out of 10 issues by doing the simple steps that I just told you. But if you have the opportunity to dyno the shock after a crash or a really rough racetrack, I would certainly recommend that. The other thing is, speaking of crashing, if you crashed and you bent 2 shocks, now I'm not talking you just banged wheels with a guy, bent the front end, and you know the front shocks are bent, but if you flip, send all 4 in, okay? If the others don't need work, you're not gonna get charged for it. The dyno's free, but that way we know you're good. I can't tell you how many times we open up a box and there's 3 shocks that are destroyed, shafts bent, bodies bent. Call the customer, where's the 4th shock? Oh, that one's straight. That one's fine. Send it in, please, so we can just check it and make sure, run it on the dyno. Maybe it is okay, but we want to make sure that all of your shocks are good, okay? So if you crash, send them all in. We don't charge you to dyno them. Good evening, RJ. And yes, that's Hudson Sherman, quarter midget. He's been practicing it at the dirt track here. He's not old enough to go to a real quarter midget track until the spring. So we're letting him burn some laps on the dirt. Once he officially starts his quarter midget racing, he'll probably just run pavement, because mini Indy's 15, 20 minutes from here, and it's a super, super cool track. So it needs a bath. All right, so that kind of covers shock maintenance. As far as torsion bars are concerned, generally, if you have the ability to spin them in V-blocks with the dial indicator and make sure nothing's bent, that's a good idea. If you don't, simply taking the arms and stops off and just spinning them to make sure they're free in the bushings, they're not catching anywhere in the bushings, and the bushing needs replaced, or the bar might be slightly bent. And then also just giving them a good visual for marks in the middle of the bar. If that's the case, we need to clean out the inside of that tube. There might be where the support was, a little weld burned through, that as the bar is deflecting, it's catching that. So just make sure you give the bar a good visual for any marks in the middle, make sure it spins free in the tube, and that everything's good. Very, very rarely will you see a torsion bar break or crack or anything like that. That's extremely rare. So those are the things just to keep an eye on every week. Every 20 races or so, your shock should be gone through, okay? It's no different than your engine. It's a piston moving up and down in a cylinder. It can only do that action so many times before the oil starts to break down, seals start to wear out, bushings start to wear out, and it's much more cost effective to rebuild them frequently than wait till you have a major problem. Hello, Russ Reed. I'm going to scroll up here because I think there was a question that I skipped over. Okay, second shift, a through shaft that has an initial dead spot that goes away after working it a bit. The through shaft shock is a bit of a quandary there. Extremely hard to bleed all of the air out. I would be concerned because you shouldn't have a dead spot and then it work its way out. Those do have a nitrogen fill and they're sealed. There's a little bitty bladder in there, so it might be a good idea to bring that in, have us check and make sure it hasn't lost nitrogen that way. And through shaft shocks do need rebuilt more frequently on our quarter midget side because twice as many seals, a lot of internal pressure in there, and so about 15 races or so, and those need rebuilt. Anybody else tuned in have questions pertaining shock maintenance or anything else with your race program? Season's winding down. We hope you guys all finish really strong, and anybody have any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them. While I'm waiting for questions, we sold most of our used shocks that we had. However, we're starting to freshen up a couple more that have came in, and then a few trade-in shocks. Some of you have taken advantage of our trade-in program, and so a few people that have traded in CSI shocks for a different model. They maybe went from a micro to a sprint car or something like that. We had a guy quarter midget to a micro. We'll be freshening those shocks up and putting them on. So later this week you'll see some more shocks, and we can go there. Can you explain the proper way to zero out coilovers? So typically what I would do, didn't catch the name, Jay. Typically what I do is the car is on blocks. I would just screw the ride height adjuster down until it was just slightly loading the coil spring, okay? Again, that's the same as doing a torsion bar stop. As long as you do it the same every time, you're gonna be fine. So I would make sure there's no slop there and it's just slightly preloading that spring. That's how I always set mine. Same thing with a torsion bar. I would screw that bolt down by hand till I really couldn't tighten it anymore by hand, and that would be my home position, okay? Troy, pressures on a 600 micro with the wing. Typically we're starting 25 left front, 35 right front, 40 right rear, 20 left rear, and then altering from there as the track slicks off. PJ, are you referring to running a soft torsion bar and in conjunction with a soft coil spring? I just want to make sure that's what you're asking. Mark, it's $40 labor per shock on a quarter midget. So parts and labor, if it's just a freshen, you're looking at about $60 a shock to totally freshen them, okay? Okay, so PJ, that is your question. I have seen some dirt midget guys 10, 15 years ago have a lot of success with that. Jake from our shop could chime in on this, but I believe Andy Bondio's midget maybe is that way or was that way at one time. I personally don't have a whole lot of experience with it. I would be a little gun shy just because at the rate of which a torsion bar and a coil spring reacts, and you've got two different things kind of going on there. I tend to be a little old school and get concerned trying off the wall stuff like that. But I have seen it done, and I have seen it actually work. And I believe Bondio's midgets might be that way. I could be wrong, but certainly worth trying. You wouldn't be the first to try it. Okay, Matt, you got your shocks. Great. If you want to shoot me an email, I don't remember if I have your email, but shoot me an email, Garrett, Garrett at csishocks.com, and I will reply with what we use as far as a tolerance for looking at old traditional numbers, and that'll give you a good idea how to relate the numbers we gave you on your sheet to that. Ryan, typically we just run the double adjustable on the right rear. Some guys are running it right rear and left rear. I personally wouldn't recommend it on the front. I don't see a huge need to change compression on the front, and front shocks get wiped out more than anything else, and that's just an added cost if you were to crash them, because the double adjustable is more expensive. So I wouldn't recommend it. We have built them because some people insisted on having the double adjustability on all four corners. If I were to build a race car, a micro or a mini sprint, I wouldn't put double adjustables on the front. I would just run a double on the right rear. Troy, we don't rebuild ARS shocks. They're right here 10 minutes from us, and so we don't have parts for their shocks. We don't have the tools to work on their shocks, so we don't rebuild ARS. We do obviously our own brand, AFCO Pro, Penske. We've pretty much narrowed it down to that. It just gets to be difficult to keep parts for every brand of shock, so unfortunately we don't work on ARS. Anybody else tuned in have a question for episode 32? Hard to believe it's been 32 weeks already. As the season's winding down, we're working on some really cool stuff for Monday Morning Quarterback. We're working on trying to pre-tape some segments from customer shops, and then we can show that at the 9 o'clock hour along with me live, so we can show you some different looks at things. It gets hard this late Monday nights to show you everything I want to, so we're working on doing some pre-recorded stuff. And since you guys keep tuning in and sharing it with all your friends, we will keep showing you new stuff. Steven, new for PRI. We're working on a bunch of new stuff. So certain things we're just refining, and then we're working on some new stuff as well. So got a new quarter midget shock coming out, and working on a new gas shock, and definitely we'll have some new stuff at PRI. So Chad, so the RS12 hasn't been produced 4 years now, and the biggest changes when we went from the 12 to the 15 was new base valve, new piston, and some new needles, so we have a finer adjustment range. Through shafts on dirt. We actually had a customer win a national championship with the through shafts on the dirt. So as long as you're taking care of them, I don't see it being an issue on the dirt at all. So yeah, I think you'd be fine. Tim, that's a hard one for me to say, how much pressure for a double adjustable AFCO, unless we've built the shock. Because the pressure you're going to run is a couple things. What's going to work best for the car, and then what's the minimum we can run without cavitation. So if we've never ran it across our dyno and checked that, we're not real certain how low you can go without cavitation. A lot of the double adjustable AFCOs, you got to keep a fair amount of pressure in. If it is a shock that we've done, shoot me an email. I can look it up and let you know. Brian, no, the seminars are completely sold out for PRI. Sold out about a month ago on those. We're looking at potentially doing another one in the spring, but we'll kind of see what the interest is there. So we sold out both the Friday and Sunday there. Cool. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We look forward to doing these for you each week. If I missed your question, private message me, Garrett Andrews here on Facebook, or shoot me an email, garrett@csishocks.com. Be more than happy to help you guys. Hope you have a fantastic week. One last question. Dan, dial indicator. The ultimate way to check your torsion bar to make sure nothing's gone awry and you can't get it to a dyno. If you can put it in a set of V-blocks with a dial indicator and just spin it, that'll give you a good indication if something got tweaked or not. That's kind of an old school way how guys used to check your torsion bars. So, all sorts of questions here. Michael, hard for a driver to feel cavitation, but visibly you would see kind of a bounce in the car, handling issues, etc. But typically a driver can't feel and tell you the shock is cavitating. So, all right, guys, have a great week, and we will see you next Monday. Take care.